Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Just a Recording Podcast, where we have conversations with individuals that think differently and challenge the status quo with success and valuable lessons. This week's guest is with a very special person that means a lot to not only me, but a lot of the community in Raleigh. I crossed paths with this individual when I first moved back to Raleigh just shy of 2 years ago, and this gentleman took me under his wing and really just introduced me to all of the amazing individuals that I have met along the way. We have experienced so much together, not only through growth with individualism, but also just together. There's several times where we're just talking, in the cafe or just one-on-one or post-class, our spiritual class that we take together, and we look at each other and say we should have been recording this conversation. So anytime that this gentleman talks, I listen, and I love the way that he looks at not only life, but spirituality, God, connecting the source. Anything that this gentleman talks about, you need to listen to. And this episode is packed with gems and just small little diamonds. Now, I want to remind everybody, this episode was recorded on the 30th of December, so a little bit before everything that's happening in the world that's going on to today, so take that with a light heart. We also talk about some things that might trigger you or might challenge you to think a little bit differently, and so I encourage you to release all your inhibitions of what you think and listen to what we say and listen to what we talk about. So I'm really excited for you to check out this week's podcast. Before we go ahead and get into the podcast, I want to talk to you a little bit about my podcast sponsor, therootbrands.com/universe. That's therootbrands.com/universe. I am so honored that this company has been supporting me, and I've been taking their products for the last 9 months, and they have helped me dramatically from not only my celiac disease, but also just focusing on work and being able to stay on task and not have, coffee or caffeine, have to come into play. It's been incredible to really experiment with these two products. So I'm really excited to bring them to you. So please go ahead and check them out and give them some love. Let's go ahead and get into this episode. I appreciate you, fam. Peace. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Just a Recording Podcast. I am mind blown that this is finally happening, that we are finally having a one-on-one conversation. So for those of you who've been listening, episode 1, Conversation with Five Guys, was kicked off. It was supposed to be basically Sherif and I, and it just morphed into this beautiful conversation with 4 other individuals that really changed my perspective of how I wanted podcasts to go. And it was an incredible conversation where we just it was right after Raw Conscious Conversations was really started, and it really kind of kicked everything off for me. And so I want to introduce this gentleman because not only is he a close friend, a brother, a mentor, somebody that I look up to, somebody that's been advising spiritually for me, somebody that I like to kick it and just conversate with all the time. And every time we talk, I wish we're recording the conversations because it's just dime pieces after dime pieces. And even our story of how we met is simply incredible. And so I am ecstatic to bring you the one and only Sherif Fouad. I almost messed up your last name.
Well, I mean, it's not English, so you really can't get it wrong. Whatever you say, there's no English way to say it. So thanks, man. That was an awesome introduction. I'm really excited to kick it. Like you said, we're always talking about, like, damn, that was good. We should have recorded that. So it's cool to actually be recording it.
Hopefully, I know, right?
Hopefully we're not now recording and then we're just like, nothing comes to mind. Like,
I know, right? Nothing's coming through. So, well, first off, I mean, I love talking a little bit about how we met, and I think, kicking that off is always fun, and it's such a silly story, but I think it's great in terms of, I was looking at a juice bar, and we've told this story several times, but ultimately I was looking at kind of purchasing one. And when I did a Google search, yours popped up, Raleigh Raw. And Sherif's the, CEO and founder of Raleigh Raw. And I was like, yo, this place is dope. And I was in LA at the time just looking at pictures. And then when I, for some reason, I ended up moving back with my sister and everything fell through in the juice bar that I was looking at. But when I came through on a Saturday afternoon, I was craving an acai bowl. And gosh, it wasn't Emily. Who was it? It was
Lindsay?
no, it wasn't Lindsay. She
Caitlin, maybe.
introduced us.
I don't. Someone they were like, hey,
All
there's
tattoos. What's her name?
that's everyone.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah,
Skinny
they were
girl with
just
all tattoos.
Caitlin, maybe.
Caitlin. It was
Yeah,
Caitlin. I don't know
yeah,
why I didn't remember her name. She introduced us and was like, well, that's the owner right there. And you and I just started kicking it and we started
yeah,
talking on Instagram and it was the
yeah.
block party. It was Run Club. I listened to your podcast and I was just blown away and we just started kicking it and you would tell me to show up and I would do it. And you kind of introduced me to your crew.
That's literally what that place is about. That's why it's kind of sad to see different businesses that aren't like brick and mortars that aren't really fully expressing themselves right now because of the pandemic. But that space is no nod to any individual person. There's just an energy in that space that is meant to connect you with other people. Some of it is by design, and the rest of it is by just adding on, like people coming in and interacting with the space and adding their own energy and their own essence to the space. And so it's really cool when I hear about someone coming in from out of town, they don't know anybody, and they almost just get like inserted into the Raleigh community by way of Raleigh Raw. And it's sometimes it's to our credit, but my point is that oftentimes it's not. That day it happened to specifically be me, but had it not been in there, it would have been the person sitting next to you on the stool or,
Yeah.
and so it's just about that place. It lends itself to speaking to someone in a way that other cafes and restaurants and places don't. That's why that to me, what I'm most proud of that place is the part that we don't do, which is it's the part that like we allow for, but we don't actually create it. It's
Right.
the part that you guys create. That's
Right.
what.
Yeah. Like it
That's
would
what's
have
so
been,
exciting.
Greg or Doug
Yes,
or Gianni or
exactly.
Christian or
Yeah,
Chuck,
and they would have
like
been like, hey,
Mark, Freddie, like,
and what happens? They're like, there's this happening this week, and then next week, and that week, and like, so none of those things are any like direct revenue builders, but they are totally indirect, community builders, which I think is really fun.
yeah. I mean, I would argue that it almost is a revenue builder because look at what I did. I was working 5 days a week out of Raleigh Raw. I would come there every day and every day I would have a dope
Yeah.
conversation with somebody new, but I was there kind of getting acai bowls or coffees and
Yeah, no, it lends to the bottom line, but it's indirect. And
right, right,
so
right. It's intangible.
I think the key is like, and when I thank God and I pray and I think about how we are a restaurant that's alive in a pandemic, and when I ask myself, because you always learn from your mistakes, but like you also got to take a moment to learn to study why you're succeeding. Like, why are we doing well right now? So you can learn from that too. And I honestly think that might be the reason, is because all of those indirect, intangible attempts to connect with human beings at a core level, they never serve the bottom line. They never look good on a P&L. In fact, they probably hurt the P&L
Right.
because they take you away from things that could be like direct sales. But then but that's not, first of all, that's not why we are in business. We're in hospitality to serve people, not to become rich. If I wanted to become rich, which I do, I would choose another industry, which maybe I will. um, but that's not why you're in restaurants, is to become rich. It's to connect with people. And so then when a pandemic happens, you're reminded why all of those little deposits day in and day out, and then the community thanks you right back by keeping you alive while every other place across the world is shutting down. And it's like emotionally and very rewarding, and like you just overwhelmed with gratitude when
Right.
when you're floating when you shouldn't be, when every single external circumstance tells you there's no way we should be in business and we're still in the black, not by much, but by, if we're in the black at all, I'm happy, you know.
Right.
So
Yeah, I mean, the best example I can think of for that is like the block party, like how much of a pain in the neck was that to put that on, and like all the
yeah,
hoops you had to jump through. But look at what it did for everyone that it came and attended, and even the people that missed out. They were like,
yeah.
"Damn, the block party sounded so dope. I can't believe I didn't go."
Yeah, I mean, I'm really looking forward to us, not just Raleigh Raw, but like us as a community, independent of a company, just getting back with people together. And now things like block parties are going to be way more exciting now that that stuff's been taken away from us. Like
Right.
anything to hang out outside, to party outside, to do some physical activity outside, to do things communally together. I can't wait to start setting up stuff like that, even outdoor workouts, all that stuff. I mean, I don't think that I've ever taken that stuff for granted. I've always been, I like literally I built a business around it. But, you know, I think now a lot of people are realizing how important that stuff is. And I can't wait. You know, I feel like a lot of us think that like 2021 is only 2 days away. And so then, oh, in 2 days, everything's going to be back to normal.
Right.
And like, obviously we know that's not the case, but if enough people collectively think like that, maybe it will shift us to a place of normalcy again. I mean, that's definitely how that works. But I do believe that halfway, you know, before halfway through the year, we're going to be back and firing on all cylinders, all of us, like the whole world. And I'm really hopeful for that.
Agreed. Yeah. So typically I like to go into a little bit of back history of just kind of who you are and where you're from, but I know that you've done a lot of these and we've talked plenty about that. But obviously I like to talk a little bit about your culture because I know that speaks a lot of who you are as an individual and like your belief system and kind of what you practice day in and day out is also kind of evolved off of that. So why don't you talk a little bit about your culture and kind of how that brings you to balance each and every day?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was born in Egypt and I grew up from age 4 in America, in Northern Virginia, outside of Washington D.C. And I went to college at ECU, so that's how I got into North Carolina. And then I've lived in LA a little bit. I've lived in New York City for like 7 years after college. Um, and I'm a nomad. I travel all the time. So even if I haven't lived somewhere, like I've lived in a lot of different places for months on end. And so ever since we were little, and I was just talking to my parents the other day, it was my dad's birthday a few days ago. And I was just telling them, hey, thank you for always like making us spend our summers in the Middle East. And, you know, growing up when I was in elementary school in Reston, Virginia, they were making us spend our whole summers, 3 months every year in the Middle East, in Egypt, and North Africa, and Europe. And like, I kind of like, I loved it, but it was like also I was away from all my American friends. And so I would bring them back all these cool souvenirs every year, like Coca-Cola collector item, like bottles and all this stuff. They all thought it was crazy because it was like, I would bring heavy loaded sodas. And like, it's a stupid thing to bring, but like, it was just like, I was just thinking my parents, like, you know, it's because of them because we are just a composite of especially of our early stage experiences. So what people look and see, like, how can someone be living out of a suitcase for months or years on end? That's normalized in my mind to just not just to always be in places where I don't know anything. And like in the summers, I would literally be in Egypt, and it's not like here where you don't let your kid go outside. I would just be in Alexandria, like of Alexander the Great, like one of the biggest cities in the world, right? And like Cairo. And like they just let me, 7 years old, just making my way through Alexandria and figuring out, you know, and like getting my Arabic better. So, you know, and having to get my Arabic tight and all that. And so I'm like, man. And so then when I went to Mexico a few months ago, it was like within 2 weeks, I knew enough Spanish to like make my way, you know, and it's just, you know, throwing you in there and and I just didn't realize that that's something that was cultivated, you know, because of my parents throwing me in that. So that's that. And then, you know, I grew up Muslim. And I think one thing I'd like to say, as I've been reflecting on this lately, is I'm not any of those things. Like I've never been able to fit in. I've always wanted to fit in. I've always wanted to be when I got to America, I wanted to be the American, but in America, I was the Egyptian. And so then when I go in the summer back to Egypt, I was the American because I was visiting Egypt with the American accent. And like, and now that I'm selling, plant-based foods in the middle of downtown, like I'm seen as very liberal. And then as an entrepreneur, I could sometimes, in some of my beliefs, some people think I'm like on the right, and like, and that, and like, this has been my whole story, my whole life. And like, I think that what I'm finding is I'm just an individual, and I'm really big on like individualism.
Right.
And like the paradox here is I'm all about community, but community works when we work on the individual. And so like, I don't, oftentimes we lean on the group that we are associated with to compensate for our own shortcomings so we can get ahead by accessing the strength of the group. And I think that that's great to do, but I also think it renders us like a little weaker than we could be if we cultivate some of those things on our own, so that way we contribute to a stronger group rather than allowing the group to pull us along or to represent our ideas. It's easy to like have a group represent our ideas. And so like I'm on the left, like a lot of people who are on the left, for example, would say like I subscribe to like these 4 or 5 ideals. Well, the rest left subscribes to maybe 10 or 12. And so then by proxy, you have to subscribe to the ones that you don't necessarily, just so you can say you're part of the left.
Right.
And it's like, but then that's not really you anymore. That's just like a watered down version of you now. But you have to say that so you can be part of this group. Right. And like, that's just using the left as an example. The right is the same and every religion is the same. And so like, I'm like, I don't really want to do that. I want to be just totally me. And then, and so I think people have a hard time with that. And like, you even see on social media, how many people on social media are posting original content versus reshare? A reshare is the same. It's the social media version of what I'm talking about. Here's an idea that I generally agree with. I didn't come up with it on my own, but it resonates. And so I'm reposting. And now, again, I repost myself, but I conscious of that because I'm like, what's the percentage of what I'm reposting versus original thoughts that are coming from me? The world doesn't need to just see a whole bunch of reposts. If they're following me, they're following me. And so
right.
I should challenge myself and do my audience a service of coming up with original ideas and risking the fact that I at best will get low engagement or at worst be ridiculed. Right. And like, that's something that and it's interesting to go right from religion and put it into social media, because what I'm talking about here is social psychological behavior that we've been dealing with for millennia. It's now living on social media. And so I want to like bring that up as an example, because that's just how it's manifesting. The same stuff that that kind of messed with me as a child, or that I learned or digesting as a child, it's manifesting itself in social media now. And so
social media is the magnifying glass that just got a closer look as to what was really going on.
Yeah. I mean, and so I know that I just went on a tangent, but which I tend to do, but like I think what I'm getting at is that I don't have a thing. I don't have a label. I don't have a box. And so people make assumptions on not just me, but everyone. We all make assumptions about who a person is based on quick snapshot judgments, because that's how the brain organizes chaos. Across an introduction, it's like, okay, I don't know anything about this person. Let me like Rolodex through all of my life experiences and put them in something that I can understand. That's just the brain's way of sorting out.
We need people to fit in a box.
Yeah, we just need to make sense of something we don't know yet.
Right.
And as we get to know them and they give us more data points and more information about themselves, that box starts to shapeshift and it changes a little bit. But the interesting thing here is, sometimes we don't like where it changed. Mm-hmm. And so it's like this box that let's say I make a box about you when I meet you, right? Whose fault is that a box was made? It's mine. I'm the one who put the box on you. Now, let's say you start giving me data points and things you do and say changes the way the box looks, right? If I really love you, like unconditionally as a friend, and this isn't a relationship based on, utility, like you're gonna give me something. I actually just really love you as a friend. Then as you show me that the box is different, I'm going to be cool with that. I'm like, okay, I appreciate these data points. This is helping me understand that I misunderstood the box, and now the shape is a little bit different. Now I have a more accurate understanding of who Patrick is. But what often happens is when you show me the box is different, I'm like, I don't like this shape. And then I vilify you for you not living up to the original shape. Mm-hmm. And so what is that? I projected on you what I think you are, right? And now you've shattered my own projection. That's my fault that I made the projection. It's my, I should let it shift rather than shatter. But now I'm just like, oh. And so we see that so much now on social media. It's like, man, I thought that person was about this. It turns out they said this, cancel them, right? And now you have this cancel culture. And it's like, well, they never said they were about that. You just needed them to be about that, right? There's something in you that needed that person to be about that thing. And when they weren't, you're going to ostracize them, or you're going to cancel them because they don't live up to some projection.
Man, didn't we have this conversation with John Cornegay of like, don't ever meet like your idol, like don't idolize celebrities, like, because when you meet them and realize that they're
be disappointed.
You'll always be disappointed.
When you meet your idol, you'll be disappointed every time, because that's exactly right. You put on this projection of what they should be, and we're seeing that so much right now. And like, people are like, hey, with your platform, no, I'm not talking about me, but just out there, like with your platform, you need to have they did that with Michael Jordan, right? Like he was like, hey, with your platform, you need to fight for like black rights and all that stuff. And like back then, like any black person fighting for black rights would have lost their platform, like, back in the 90s, like, and so I don't know a whole story about it, but like he had a choice, like, do I fight for my race, or do I make billions of dollars and then maybe down, like behind the scenes under the table, take care of mine, right? And so I'm not one to say which one he should do. I have nothing to do with that choice, but the choice is his to make, right? That is my opinion, it's his to make. Maybe he helped his culture in one way and they needed him to help the culture in another way. And like, it's his choice to make. And like, he got vilified for that. I actually don't think Michael Jordan is a stand-up person in terms of character based on what I've read about him, even though he was my childhood idol. But I respect him. And I think that, again, when you get put on these places, like you're a human with all kinds of good things and quirks and faults and all of that. And sometimes we project we see perfection in people, and we're like, oh, let me be around that. Let me bask in that glow, because then it'll make me feel good about the imperfections that I hold. So it's like, you know what I mean? But then we get around that, and like, we find out that they're imperfect too. And that reminds us of our fallacies. And then our fantasy has like now exploded.
Right.
And so,
you're looking at a mirror.
Yeah. And that's why it's important to like really allow real loving relationships are about, you allow people to shift, because they were never that shape in the beginning. Like in the first place, that was your own projection. So you just let people, become what they are. And now if that crosses your boundaries or something like that, then you just create space and distance, but you don't change them.
Yeah. So, I want to talk a little bit about, obviously, Raw You, because I think that's really kind of evolved into something that's been incredible. When you started, obviously, Conscious Conversations, it was all in-person meetings, and it was basically, it was almost a spiritual conversation of you helping explain a little bit more of not only yourself, but the ego. And man, I've just gained so much knowledge, I think, just from attending. What are you at 6? How many classes have you done so far? It's
15.
15. Yeah. I mean, just from attending all 15 has just been so incredible. But talk about, obviously, why you wanted to start Conscious Conversations, and then how it really evolved virtually.
So I wanted to start it just because we have conversations like this, and you know, if you do a lot of personal development work, you find that you're not getting anywhere. And I'm like, why doesn't this motivation help me? Like motivation is taking me like a little bit, but not where I need to go. It's not taking me all the way. And so as I became obsessed with personal development and becoming a better version of myself, I kept peeling back the layers. Well, motivation, knowledge, having the right financial resources. So like acquiring funding, getting the community on board, marketing, all these things. Well, then like keep going down, down, down. Like I'm still so, and then I realized there's trauma. Everyone has trauma. Like I used to think trauma was like being like terribly abused as a child. That's an obvious form of trauma, but trauma could be like misunderstood as a child. And then you tell yourself some stupid story and it runs on autopilot for 30 years. Right. And so
Right.
then that's affecting your ability to get up and go to work and get shit done. And so what I realized is like, what's the crux of all personal development? And I deduced it all the way down to trauma. So I'm like, shit, well, that's not a very sexy conversation to have. How can we have conversations around trauma and understanding the subconscious in a way that's packaged that people are excited to learn about? And so I set off to create a curriculum that I never really mentioned the word trauma, but if I did, it was here and there, but like it was all about the opposite. It was about creating consciousness, which is expanding your awareness, because as that balloon grows, there's no space for trauma anymore. So instead
Right.
of eradicating trauma directly, we're just talking about, instead of like focusing on what is not, let's spend our time understanding what is, and what is will grow up large enough to make no room any longer for what is not. So trauma goes away when you shed light on it, right?
Right.
And so that was the idea, is like, how do we shed light on trauma? And that is to become more conscious. Well, how do you become more conscious? Have conscious conversations. The stuff that we don't like to talk about, let's make it fun and let's make it sexy. The same thing we do downstairs. We make eating healthy fun and sexy with music and awesome people, right? Upstairs, we made it fun and sexy by music and dancing, and like it was a party and we were wilding. Now it goes over to the online space and we start doing these classes on Zoom. What I noticed is it didn't lend itself to Zoom. We had a few classes that were popping, but like this is a class that requires a lot of active participation. And when people come on and their cameras are off and they're just kind of passively watching, and we're doing role plays and breakouts and filling out stuff, like this is a tour of your own self. This isn't a tour of some curriculum like a TED Talk. I'm inviting you to know yourself for the first time in this class. And so if you're going to be detached, you're not going to get the same experience. And so what I found is this is built really for an in-person experience, like a workshop or a retreat or the studio above Raw. And it just didn't translate over to Zoom very well, because I think in the middle of the pandemic, people aren't really as proactive. Like people are in a sink or swim situation. People have bigger fish to fry than like doing all this proactive work in 2020, right?
Yeah.
And so maybe we can back burner that proactive stuff till things settle down. And I think what people are looking for now is a more passive experience. And if they're looking for something as active as engaging and as demanding as our conscious conversations are, then maybe that should be in a paid workshop setting. But otherwise, what I'm thinking is, and I sent out a letter to all of you members yesterday, or I don't know if it went out yet, but I drafted it yesterday. And it's to say that we're going to go ahead and stop doing the subscription and the Zoom thing. And we're going to reimagine what Raw U is, because where I thrive is in the in-person space. And if we're going to continue to do something on a digital space, let's make it passive, like what we're doing here, where
Yeah.
someone can just, like a podcast or video where we're having a conversation. If someone's listening to it in the background, it's cool, but it's not going to require someone to really get involved and fill out stuff and be all engaged.
Yeah. And something kind of came to mind, and maybe you'll agree or disagree, but it was almost like people were grasping for like that magic pill during the pandemic. Like they wanted like that quick fix. They were like fiending, like, tell me how to make this okay. Like, how can I make what I'm dealing with okay? And so that led to them just sitting in a class waiting for you to drop a gem that was going to fix everything that they were going through. And they were going to go, I got fixed by Sherif. Conscious conversations healed me.
That's a great point, which goes back to what we mentioned before. We project what we need somebody to be, right? And everyone, we do that with everybody. And, you know, in retrospect, we could do that, but that would be the equivalent of me putting sugar in our smoothies downstairs in order to make them taste delicious, right? Like I could give you what you want, but that's never been our thing. Our thing has always been giving people what they need, the raw stuff, right? Like in Raleigh Raw, like the stuff that's unadulterated. And there is no quick fix when it comes and there is no one size fits all, because everyone had their own individual experience, their own trauma, which is why everyone had to do individual work. So what worked for you in the pandemic isn't going to work for him or her.
Right.
So yeah, and that's maybe what you're talking about would work better on like a one-on-one coaching session or something. But like, and like I was telling you before, when you start down the personal development, the top rung of the ladder is raw motivation. The bottom, when you go all the way down into the well underground, is trauma. In between the top and the bottom, there's resources, there's access, there's all these other things. But people are just tipping their toe in personal development. The first thing they're seeing is they get obsessed with the raw motivation. It's the memes that we repost. It's the one-liner quotes that we see on Instagram and we share them out, right? That's what everyone is hung up on. And then we wonder, why am I in the same place 6 months later? Because you never climb down any other rungs. There's a lot of more rungs. There's the hard work rung. There's the what I do in the dark is what puts me in the light rung, what no one's looking. It's like going down, down, down. It's like eating ramen noodles wrong. And then it's like down, 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 like, right? And it's like, and I still put myself in those situations, like, you know, and it just so I don't get really comfortable. You know, today we were scrubbing floors and we were hanging lights and we were like, we're back to doing what we did 3 years ago and scraping by with our money. And like, and then finally, like I was saying, like you get to trauma. Now, a lot of people don't want to do that work because it's so uncomfortable. It's buried for a reason. Right. And so that's up to you. And so I think going forward, what people come to Raleigh Raw for is community and connection. I just want to do more than that. I want to continue to uncover who I am, and in the process, inspire others to uncover who they are, and just to get rid of this like these profits that we invest all of these celebrities and these organizations and these groups that we worship, and we say like, this is me. Like, I want to eradicate all of that, all this celebrity culture and this cancel culture, and just return ourselves to who we are, where we are to blame when our life isn't what we want it to be. We are to credit, not that guru, when our life is what we do want it to be. Right? Like, let's take all the blame so we can take all the credit. Right? And like, that's what I think Conscious Conversations is about. And, I think it was a massive success. It was created for an in-person space. It did its job. And now let's reimagine it and see what it can be next year. But let's scrap it and start over.
I would agree. I think it was a huge success. And one of the things that I want to not only compliment you on, so two things here, is that you introduced me to Myrna, who was your spiritual advisor. And we took spiritual class where we studied A Course in Miracles together over a couple semesters. And then this goes hand in hand with what I want to credit not only you, but also the setting in Conscious Conversations is in hand while Myrna was also helping me. You were also helping me remend my relationship with God, which, I say this many times, I have a newfound love for this thing, this entity, this, whatever it is, God, this thing that we all want to look up to and like accredit success or talk to when we're in failures. But there was a moment where I would have slapped myself if I would have said, I love God. And now here I am looking back at the conversations that you and I had about God and the conversations that we would have in spiritual class about God And, you know, I would attest a lot of the conversations to help me get to that place.
Yeah, man. Thanks for saying that. It's I mean, I'll be honest, sometimes I look and I lose faith, even me. I'm just like, because the God of the world we live in now is the almighty dollar. And I'm like, man, what would happen if I committed all of my brain power to chasing money? Like, could I hit the million mark, at the billion mark? And then like I might like start focusing on that for a few days, and then I feel just so empty. And so then I stop, and then I return to my faith and my spiritual practice, and then the numbers go up on their own. And I'm just like, this I'm just like learn like everything I chase eludes me, and every time I get grounded and I start to calibrate, um with that frequency of that higher power, then it just comes to me effortlessly. And so I see people working so hard to get what's coming to me. And again, I forget it. So then I do the same thing. I'm like, I want more. Let me go out. Maybe I'm being lazy, and my ego starts talking to me in words that it knows it will dupe me. Like, lazy. That's a good way to get me to chase money, is to call me lazy. Right.
Right.
And so like, because it knows that if it calls me greedy, I'll be like, no, I'm not greedy. But if you call me lazy, that's like insecurity. So I'll be like, all right, let me get hustling and let me show up and do this and do that. And like, I think one thing I've learned is that if you can just, and I don't mean sit around and do nothing, but focus on the stuff at hand in your business and do that stuff really, really, really well. Like what you thought you should do, like 3 times better than that. Like the
Right.
quality of the thing that you're doing, do it really, really good. Then it just starts to come in, you know? Like, let's not do tasks in the spirit of accomplishing the task. Let's do tasks in the spirit of creation, right? In the spirit of creating something. Like if you had this one thing to create and everyone's looking to see how it's going to turn out, and we're just talking about doing the fucking dishes, right? Like that's how you do it. The simple stuff, just do it like as if people are all looking over the fence to see how you're going to do it, and you do it with excellence, and then that carries over to the conversations, to the interviews, to the making stuff. And then you just get so caught up in just delivering that level that you forget about the return.
Mm-hmm.
And since you're here, because God is the creator, so like since you're in creator alignment, you're not thinking about needs in me, right? And so the return just happens naturally on its own. And so, because like a higher power doesn't need for anything. So you have to be in the same, to calibrate like that, you have to not need for anything. And
Right.
how do you not need for anything? By knowing that you don't need anything, by knowing that that you're perfect as you are, right? And then you start just creating. So one, acknowledge that needs are an illusion. Of course, that could trigger people, because they could be like, easy for you to say, I have a parent who's this and I have this. Like, I get that. But like moving from a place of like not thinking of needing some kind of return for my efforts, like, right. and
Mm-hmm.
and and then putting out excellence as if the remedial stuff was really, really important. And again, anything I ever teach or mention are things that I struggle with. So that's internal dialogue for me. Like I'll be driving and I'll be like, man, how come that client didn't hit? Or how come that class didn't hit? And I'll be like, I don't think I gave it 110%. I probably gave it like 80%, if I'm being honest. And so I can hold myself to my own, you know, my own criticisms.
Yeah. That was good. I think some other things that are really incredible about you is you know what to say and you know what to shine the light on in the moment and when it's happening. And I think one of those moments is this past year during the protests and everything that kind of really went on in Raleigh. And you really kind of, you live downtown and obviously your business is downtown, and you took it upon yourself to really kind of shine a spotlight on some things that a lot of, let's just call white America, didn't think was really going on, and was like, fuck that doesn't happen. Like, no way, that shit doesn't happen. And I think how you handled the platform that is Raleigh Raw and really shined a light on that experience that you witnessed firsthand was a fucking blow to a lot of just, you know, white individuals that didn't think that this was possible, that it could happen. And I think, I don't know if anyone else would have been able to do that. You know, one, obviously, you know, you're Egyptian, right? Like people can look at you and not know exactly, like, you know, what ethnicity you are. And so you kind of don't really fit the mold of like somebody that's Caucasian. But I think you did that so flawlessly. And I was so proud, obviously, of you as a friend, just to kind of see what you were doing, because there was things where I had to check myself on and was like, no way that's happening. And then you're like, holy shit, that's happening.
Yeah, that was a crazy time. And you're right. I think the one advantage of me being like of a race that is kind of, you can't really tell what I am. Like, I look like I'm mixed black and white. That might have helped. I think it also helped that like the argument that I was making is an argument that the left makes, you know, the political left makes too, you know, and so is in line with that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think that's, and the left is loud, right? And like, and there are big supporters. Our Raleigh Raw supporters are predominantly left-leaning people. And so as much as this was a racial thing that you're talking about, unfortunately, race is highly politicized, and it always has been. And so it's a very political moment, which I wasn't really looking at it that way. I was looking at it in the, it's purely racial. Like, hey, like, look at what's happening. This is my neighborhood, not just where I work, but also where I live. Luckily, God blessed me with, it was a flow moment where I was seeing everything like in slow motion. Like I felt like kind of Neo, like I had all of the perfect footage, capturing everything. I was seeing it all in slow motion. I was able to show everything that was going on. I had such a really solid grasp of the riots, and I was laterally thinking and putting pieces together and realizing like who's really at play and what they're making you think it is. And I was able to get all that and push it out. Here's the thing. It's happening again. It's always happening, right? It's happening now with the pandemic. But if I start talking about that with the pandemic, then I sound like I'm a conspiracy theorist, because I don't have the same physical evidence that I had when I was walking around in that riot. So I can't show people taking vaccines and like, and having those terrible side effects, like what's the one, Bell's palsy. Like Bell's palsy is huge as a side effect to this particular COVID vaccine. And like I can't, because the stuff is online and it's getting censored. Yo, I shit you not. I'm on the phone with my sister, who's a director at Google, and I'm yelling at her. Like, it's severing our relationship. I'm like, you can stop this. Like, you can talk to them about censorship, and like, let us decide what's true and what's not. Right. And like, it's become so tense. And like, I am brought back to that experience with the riots here. The difference is I feel that I have to keep my mouth shut. If I talk about masks, if I talk about natural immunity, if I talk about vaccines, and I kind of feel like that's my job, because I've been in immunity and health and in understanding pathogens for 10 years. Like, it's literally my whole career. I'm HACCP certified. So we have to understand that's a certification from NC State, where you understand if any pathogens entered into a sterile environment that could affect raw foods, and all the different types of pathogens and the log4 reductions. Like, these are all very scientific things that I know. And
It's not
so,
very easy to abide by HACCP laws either. It's
right.
like
And
mind blowing to think through just one page of it.
I know that that's not exactly COVID. I get that. But I'm
Right.
saying, like, this is an obsession of mine. And I'm
Sure.
not a subject matter expert, but I am I am a truth seeker. I'm always uncovering, and I don't just buy into some conspiracies. But I can tell you that this pandemic, this COVID, is very, very real, and it could be made less serious. The government has the resources to not make it as serious as it is. So those two things can coexist. A lot of people are like, you think this whole thing is just made up? Well, how about my grandmother who's dying on a ventilator right now? Is that made up? No, those two things can coexist. we have to get to a point where we can allow critical thinking, where two opposing views can juxtapose, right? Where someone can be dying of COVID and the government is not telling us the whole picture, right? And is this a play for profit? Is this a play for control? Is it both? Let's say that it's not. Let's give the benefit of the doubt to those in control. Here's the thing. I look at two things. I look at history, and the track record here is not stellar. Right?
Not at all.
Like there's Tuskegee, there's like CIA, I don't even get into all the other stuff. There's such a track record of violating trust with the general public. And the second thing is I look at is who's financially incentivized by their position. I'll tell you right now, if I get up and start speaking on my platform about masks aren't going to, the pores in the masks aren't small enough to prevent the pores in a virus, and asymptomatic spread is not a real thing. Like that's something we just started this symptomatic spread. Like that was never, we've never had that as a thing with any virus. And Fauci, the man who said to wear masks, was literally quoted to say that masks play no part in this, right?
Right.
So like, if I were to say all this stuff publicly, which I guess now I am, I stand to lose, right? I don't stand to gain anything. I stand to lose my business. I could be looked at as someone who's putting people in danger because I'm telling people not to wear masks and all this. My words can get totally reframed, and then I can be just like crucified, so to speak. It's the modern day lynching that's now going on if we don't agree. But who does have a stake? So like I said, I look at two things. What's your historic track record, and who's financially motivated? Well, obviously there's massive financial reward if people take vaccines. And those have already been paid for by our own tax dollars. They've already been paid, right? And so now the government's in a real problem, because 80% of people, they paid for 100% of vaccines, but only 20% want to take them. So now they're like, shit, they're not as foolish as we thought they were. Now they're creating campaigns with our tax money to convince us that they're safe, to try to capture the other 80%. Otherwise, they lost all that money to Big Pharma. Right. Now, Big Pharma, Pfizer, has had billions and billions of lawsuits against them for vaccines. So that's what I mean about track record. And 2.3 billion in one settlement. They have the largest settlement in all of corporation history. 2.3 billion of one law settlement. Let me ask you a question. What if you came to Raleigh Raw and you ordered the Pharaoh Manch with salmon on rice and greens, but I didn't tell you what any of the other ingredients were? Would you take it?
No.
You're celiac, so like you kind of have to know, right?
Yeah.
And if you weren't celiac, all you know is that there's salmon and there's rice and there's greens, but there's 5 other ingredients, but I'm not going to tell you. What if by some stretch of the imagination you said, fuck it, I'm going to take a chance, and then you ate and you got it, but I didn't tell you what they were, and you ate it. And let's say you got sick because you didn't know what was in it. And then you came back and you tried to sue me, and I told you that, hey, we're absolved of all liability, and you couldn't sue me. Like, could you go to a restaurant that didn't divulge its ingredients and aren't liable if you sue them, right? There's no one that would ever go to a restaurant that could injure them, and then there was no recourse. And so then when we start screaming, hey, like they're doing that over here with these vaccines, then they call you an anti-vaxxer. Well, that's like gaslighting, because like I'm actually not an anti-vaxxer. I actually am pro-vaccines. I'm pro-conscious consumption. And if we're unconsciously putting stuff in our body and there's no recourse, then at best we can't sue. And at worst, we successfully sue, and that money is paid with tax dollars. So we're suing our own collective pocket.
Right.
So it's like, and so like, it's way more nuanced than to say, he's an anti-vaxxer, he's a pro-vaxxer, she or whatever, right? There's so much going on. And then when the mothers of injured vaccinated children start to speak up, we just say, oh no, they're crazy, don't listen to them, they're conspiracy theorists. Like, you know, that's just, it's brutal. And that's kind of like with racism, like that's what was happening. It's like, I needed to get out and when black people were like, hey, they're killing us, the cops are killing us, it's the same thing. Oh, they're just angry black people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, so I need to go out and show you footage of KKK being spray painted on Confederate statues, and white people doing this, and white people breaking store windows. That's what it takes. So it makes me feel like I got to go into these, like to the Pfizer campus and start documenting stuff. Obviously that can't happen. And so do I have to be quiet until then? And then me, who I put so much work into my body and my health and my immunity, I have to wear a mask that's going to affect my own oxygen and have me and breathing in my own carbon dioxide, and then risk getting yelled at by some obese person at a store who's telling me that my health habits are putting people at risk. And I'm sensitive to her because obesity is actually one of the main things that lead to terrible symptoms with COVID. But she's over here, and not that this happened, this is obviously a hypothetical. When I do go into a store, I wear a mask because I don't want the shit show that might come of not wearing a mask. But in Mexico, it was really nice to be able to walk around and just everyone is just taking care of their health and the vitamin D that's coming from the sun and the ocean and all of that. And as you saw, we're sitting around in a ceremony, everyone, and no one's getting sick. And one thing I'll say about that is, as I know I'm jumping around, is I think it's a matter of belief. People do get sick when they feel that they're going to get sick. And in Mexico, people stay healthy because they feel that they don't need those masks. And so my original point was to come over to America from Mexico this month and start telling people like I'm Paul Revere, hey, over here, this is okay, so don't do this over here. And my dad even sat me down and he was like, that's a bad idea, because what you're trying to do is shift culture, and like you can't shift culture. And people believe what they believe, and because they believe it, it works, right? And so if you were to tell people in Mexico to behave like Americans, it wouldn't work. And if you tell Americans to behave the way they are in Mexico, it wouldn't work. And so that was a big eye-opening thing for me, is that I don't want to do what I did that time. As much as proud as you and I are of me going out into the city and documenting what was happening to Black America, I don't know that I want to do that with COVID, because we all have our funnels, our echo chambers that social media is just giving us what we're asking it to give us.
Right, because the algorithm is serving you on a silver platter exactly what you are looking for, because now everyone's in their lane and they won't go into another lane because you're being served. And why would you look for anything different if it's basically appeasing what you believe by continuing to affirm and affirm and affirm?
Because if you do look for something different, then you're going to experience cognitive dissonance, which is the enormous emotional discomfort of everything you know to be true being challenged. And that's very uncomfortable. And I live in the area of cognitive dissonance. I just read Candace Owens' book, and then I'm reading AOC's book. Those people have opposite views, right? Now hers is a biography, not an autobiography, but still when AOC gets an autobiography, I'm going to read that too. I'm reading stuff all over the place so I can burst out of my echo chambers. But my idea is, if I start talking like this, the people who follow me are already left leaning. And so they're going to say, how could you think like that based on all of the information that's out? Well, the answer is, you're looking at all of the information that's out that's in your particular echo chamber. Mm-hmm. There's all the information that you have access to. There's that much information and more that stands contrary to the data. And you say it's science, right? Well, there's science that actually goes against that science. And so you can have science that challenges other science. So obviously only one is true, but there's so many organizations that are powerful enough to make theirs look like that's the truth.
Yeah.
So then what do? What I do is I just trust my own lived experience. And I know, like, I was around a lot of people in Mexico who had COVID, and I don't know. And I know I have relatives right now that are deathly sick from COVID. I was actually just texting today, seeing if they need me to come out in a couple of weeks to literally just go there and help get them on a organic herb like regimen. So I see both sides, but my point is that there's so much more out there, and it's very similar to what happens with race in America. When we start to cry out, hey, it's not what they say, they blame the victim for victimization. Mm-hmm. They do that with COVID, and they're doing that with race in America.
That's and you get gaslit the entire time.
Exactly.
And I think what you said about the track record, I mean, case in point, California is the most ravaged state in the world for cases of COVID. 2, Gavin Newsom, who's the governor, is like changing policy every other day, and he's destroying hospitality companies. Next week, churches are opening, which is indoor gathering. And all these restaurants, all these hospitality groups that have spent thousands of dollars to create these outside dining experiences have been shut down and are basically like, figure it out, sorry, you're shut down. Joe Rogan just had a interview with John Turgeon, who's the founder of Hwood Group, and also the guy that owns Craig's. And it's such a really good interview because they're basically just talking about the hypocrisy that the government in California is doing. And I think that goes along with what you're saying in the track record is like a lot of these governors, and even Cuomo is guilty of this. They're just making decisions. Like the governor of New York said, outdoor dining is allowed. There's snow on the ground.
Yeah.
Like, how are you going to eat outside? And so
there's no empathy. They're not looking at it through other people's lenses. And again, the other thing is there are natural remedies that are being suppressed to COVID. So that's the other thing is like, it's pulling from both ends. Mm-hmm. We're suppressing natural ways to heal, and some other, like, I'm not going to get into hydroxychloroquine, but from what I've learned, which is, it's hard to learn anything about this stuff because it gets censored, it is a viable solution. And I know it was a big laughing stock when Trump was saying that, but it does seem like it's a viable solution that was saying, but again, I don't know. So I'm never going to go on my platform and start talking about this stuff, but I am interested. And I can question it. I'm never going to say something with 100% truth, but I'm questioning everything. And
y'all should be, because if we're not, we turn into sheep and we fall in line, and the government just does what they want.
Do you know why a sheep is a sheep? Like, do you know why a sheep is subservient?
Why?
Because when sheep would, obviously sheeps are like the one species that would have to actually travel, right, with their shepherd, right? So, and obviously occasionally he's got to like trim one. So which one is he going to remove from the flock as he's moving from land to land? Think about it. Which one is he going to remove? The one that's giving him the hardest time, right? The one that's not staying with the group, right? So he's going to kill the one that's the free thinker, the one that's not falling in line, right? So evolutionarily, what happens? They start to learn that they're going to die if they don't fall in line. And so sheep have literally evolved to be submissive because of the very thing that we're addressing here. And then we call it loosely, we just like, you're being a sheep. And people just think it's like nothing. No, that's literally what can happen to us. Like physically, our DNA can start to become that, and we'll pass that on to our children in the way that sheep literally have created an entire species around that, right? I don't want to pass just being blindly complicit and on into my DNA, because I know it's going to happen. You saw me have a freak out in Mexico because I was like, I can't be quieted, right? In that ceremony, I was like, I can't be, like, I'll freak out if you try to put me in a box, right? And then I'm going to be living with anxiety. And if I'm living with anxiety, then I can't create. And if I can't create, then I'm not serving the world and I'm not living out my purpose. And then all of that distorted genetics gets passed on in my gene lineage. And like, that's literally what happened with an entire species of sheep. And we shouldn't just gloss that over and just say that's sheep. That's science happening. And like, we just say, it's just a few months, just put on a mask. Do you understand? There's more repercussions than that. I come from a land where they put masks on women to make them subservient. I come from that culture. There is psychological implications to wearing a mask beyond just riding it out for a couple months. Your babies, they come to look for your facial expressions so they can sub-communicate with more than just the voice before they understand the words. You take that away from them and you put one on them too. There's trauma that's starting to develop on a subconscious level that we won't know the direct implications of until we look back in retrospect in 30 years. We're not understanding the health implications of vilifying fat and replacing it with sugar, which is what the food system did in the 1980s. Now that it's 2020, we're seeing that decision in the 1980s led to obesity, right? The same people that brought you the food pyramid and put dairy and wheat in the food pyramid of what we need to eat. That's what they told me when I moved to this country, and we're in elementary school, and they're like, these are the important food
pyramid.
And I'm like, I can tell you more about pyramids than you fuckers are telling me about pyramids, because shit is backwards. And so that's what I mean about track record, right? You guys have been not really being upfront with us. And then they say, we're creating campaigns to reestablish trust in the vaccines. Well, and because the general public, particularly Black people, are untrusting of our vaccines.
Well, there's a reason why Black people are untrustworthy, right, because of what they did with the disease.
So it's like, that's gaslighting to create something shady and then call Black people and the rest of the citizens untrustworthy. Why don't you frame it correctly and say, we have violated the trust of the general public over the last several decades or 200 years or 400, however honest you want to be. and as a result, we are going to take inventory and accountability of that violation. And we're going to make efforts to reestablish and earn back trust that we have lost due to putting out whatever in the medical world and it having adverse effects. Right? That would be something that I might pull up a chair and it might reignite my faith in vaccines, because as I said, I'm a man of science too, not just a man of God. I do believe that vaccines by definition have efficacy, but not the way that it's being handled right now.
Right. And not the way it's being delivered.
Yeah.
Yeah. I completely agree. Yeah, we went on a tangent there, but it was a good one. Yeah, there's a lot of screwy things going on in the world. Even when you're talking about Pfizer, right? They just got caught. Well, they didn't get caught, but they found out that they're privately selling vaccines to Saudi Arabia. And so like Dubai is going to be like, everyone's going to be vaccinated in Dubai.
And that's our money. That's our taxpayer money.
Yeah.
So like, this is what's nice, at least, is that it's not all getting censored. And so maybe enough of this comes out that the people who speak up, the whistleblowers, don't look like conspiracy theorists, because that's a conspiracy. Like, do you know how conspiracy theorist was a term made up in the 80s by the CIA itself to be able to gaslight people who called their shit into question? Did you know that?
No.
That's literally, it was a gaslighting strategy. Like, we'll come up with a term that when we do that, we'll just title them this, and then everyone will be like, look, they're a conspiracy theorist. And it fucking worked.
Wow. So you touched on it a little bit before on your little nomadic run. It ended in Mexico. You kind of traveled the States, took your Jeep across to the West.
Yeah.
Had some good experiences, and then ended up in Mexico. So you got any dimes you want to drop about your travels to LA or to the West Coast and then down to Mexico before we get into the real dirty?
Yeah. So some things that I learned is that the world is inherently amazing and not as divided as everything. If I'm at home and I'm assessing how collaborative or divisive or polarized the world is, on a 1 to 10, I'm going to rate it's a 9 in severity. It's really bad. Right. But if like, it's really like no one's getting along, if I'm at home, because what I'm looking at is my media, my internet, all of that stuff. But when you're driving that Jeep across the country, and I look like this in the Midwest, and I have plenty of reason to be fucked with, and I'm even like on my guard, and everyone just hit me with compliments. Hey, I love your shoes. I love your Jeep. Da da da. And they're just trying to start conversation. Just people of all ages and races and all over. And I'm just like, I'm reminded that despite the best efforts of the media to turn us against each other, we are inherently happy, good, and loving, and we get along as a species. Um, and I found that the older, the more so. Maybe that's because they're less indoctrinated with what's going on the internet. And I also found that, like, and I don't know if I should say this, but this is just an objective observation. I found that black people more so, older people more so than white, and black people more so than white people, or older people more so than young. Black people, like, so for example, I would like do social experiments. Every morning I run 5 miles. I make eye contact with everybody and I wave if I feel like I could wave and it's not going to be misconstrued as like hitting on someone, then I might. But for the most part, it's just like a head nod, because like a wave is a little bit overboard, even by my standards. So just running like head nod, and I found that people of color like respond more, and old white people for sure. I don't know. That doesn't mean anything. It's just like, it's interesting to see. I guess what that data does tell me is like, I do have a concern for the younger generation. Now, of course, that's just some stupid data and doesn't mean anything. But like, when I do get to see my nieces and nephews, what I will do is like, which I did right after I noticed all this stuff, I would go spend time with them and like, and try to figure a way that I could really connect with them and have, you know, make them have eye contact and have them tell me about what's going on, ask open-ended questions, and have them exploring their own imagination so that they could be creating, at least in their own storytelling, rather than responding to what they're looking at on the screen.
Right.
You know, I don't know what that's going to do. And that's just kind of, I don't know. We'll see. There's no telling, again, what any of the implications of all of the things that 2020 has shown us. Those implications will reveal themselves over the next several decades.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I'm looking at my, 18 turning 19-year-old nieces and, fearful for, one of them was able to stay in college and not have a roommate. So she's in a dorm room by herself, and the other is at home still attending college. And, you're thinking about, what's this doing to them, long term? Like, yeah, right now it seems like it's fine and everything's cheeky. They just have to wear a mask and deal with it. But in 5-10 years, when that trauma shows up in a completely different mechanism than what we thought it was, we're all in some deep shit.
Yeah. I mean, I'd love to be able to have these conversations, because I think that some viewers might see this and it's going to trigger a lot of people and it's going to anger a lot of people. And I would love to be able to have conversations with those people in a place that, like, where we don't have to be like, I hate you for having that opinion, because I don't hate people that tell me to wear a mask. Like, if someone's in a store, I'm going to wear a mask, right? In a store. I hate to do it, but I do it. If someone were to yell at me because they caught me not wearing a mask, I would put one on and I wouldn't yell at them. So like, I understand where that people have completely different views and they have a different set of information than I do. Right. And so I'd love to be able to get to a place where we can all sit around the proverbial table and have some conscious conversations about this stuff. But I don't think that the internet is a place for that. And unfortunately, right, during COVID, what else do we have besides the internet?
Yeah. And I think the problem with that is that you have to ensure that the people that you're having that conversation with are not using a clickbait that they found on Facebook to fuel what they think is accurate or correct, right? Like, you need science-based actions of, no, this is what Fauci said, or this is what I read from this scientist, of this is not, oh, I saw some conspiracy theorist on Facebook went on a rant on YouTube, or I read a thread on Reddit and this is what they're experiencing.
Yeah. And so I think the way I get around that, because almost everything out there is what you just explained, is one, seeing the track record of a person delivering information. B, as we mentioned before, finding out if they have a financial interest in people coming around to their side. Like the Q movement, for example, is a good example. Is like, they had a financial interest in people adopting to that, right? So that, to me, it's like, I don't know, it makes me question it. The other thing is, you get what you pay for with food and with information, with everything, right? So if you want a 99, you want to eat off the 99-cent menu at McDonald's, It's the same. It's just as bad as like just getting free information. So what I try to do is I try to buy books. Like if I'm buying a $20 book, that means I'm really committed to like diving into like 2 years of substantiated research that somebody has done. And that might be more valuable information about science, COVID, disease, virus than I'm going to get scrolling on a meme in Instagram.
Right. Yeah, I agree. So your travels ended you up in Mexico, and you were there for 4 months, right?
Yeah, just under that.
And you obviously were in this digital nomadic group that you linked up with, that you never really met anybody, but you just kind of showed up and ended up making a lot of friends and a lot of connections. And then obviously with Raw U, we have the men's group, and you had done a ayahuasca ceremony, and we were talking about it on the men's group. And, obviously I, on a like in week's notice was like, I'm coming December 4th. And so I want to definitely unwrap this little box, because I think we have some really obviously interesting things that not only happen, but I think experiences that I want to talk about for sure, because I think this is a big deal. I think this medicine and what it can do and how it can help individuals unravel kind of the subconscious and trauma that maybe was experienced at an early age, that you and I looked at each other and we're like, I feel like I just did 30 years of therapy in 8 hours. So tell a little bit about that experience, how you found the shaman, and then obviously we can talk a little bit about kind of what happened.
Yeah, so I'm in a few different groups. One of them is called Wi-Fi Tribe. One of them is called Outsite. These are all digital nomad organizations that once you're a member, you get access to their Slack channels, and then you communicate with travelers all over the world who are digital nomads, who are traveling solo for the most part, independent, individual travelers. They have the advantage of being individual travelers is that they're free to go wherever they want without having to, having a spouse or a family that they're rolling with. The disadvantage is that you're traveling solo, so it can get very lonely. So that's the reason for these groups, is that it allows solo travelers to have group affiliations when they need, and then check out when they want to be alone again. And so that's the short of it. So when I was down there, I got up with a few different the communities. For the most part, I do like to be alone, but it is nice to have. So we created these little sub channels. We did like yoga sub channel, running, eating out, going out to party, whatever. Like you could just jump in and do whatever it is you wanted to do and then get out, So that was the idea. So one of the girls in that group mentioned that she had done, I told them that I'm not here to drink tequila. Like, I don't want to be in Mexico just getting effed up every night. I'm here. I want to meet some of I understand some of the ancient wisdom that the culture has to offer. I want to understand who the locals are and not just hang around expats and tourists all the time. And so I made that very clear on the second week. And so once I put that intention out there, a lot of these really cool opportunities started coming to me. So from cacao ceremonies to ayahuasca to 5-MeO DMT and all these other spiritual things. And I wasn't going with any particular purpose. I just wanted to learn whatever it is that the natives do. So it landed me in ayahuasca. Ayahuasca is a vine, a psychedelic vine. And I've been reading a book for the last few days. I forgot the name of it, but it's, I'm listening to it right now. It's called The Immortality Key. It was recommended to me by someone in Wi-Fi Tribe because I led a conscious conversations down. Every Thursday, they asked me to lead conscious conversations down in Mexico. So I adopted the curriculum for Mexico and started teaching some of this stuff down there. This guy recommends the Immortality Key, which this might trigger some people too. But what it talks about is coquillon, which as this wine substance was known in ancient Greece, and soma as the similar substance was known in the Ayurvedic, like Himalayas. So same type substance, which is a wine, with ergot. They found traces of ergot, and all these historians have reason to believe that an ergot, if you don't know, is the fungus and the mushroom that LSD is derived from. Yeah. So what's happening is when the Greeks would say, like, I had access to the gods and they had the god of this and the god of that. It makes sense now when you look at it through the lens of psychedelics. And so again, it's happening in different parts of the world. And I haven't yet even talked about the Mayans, which is the ayahuasca. So the Mayans are doing the same thing with their ayahuasca. The Native Americans have their own peyote, right? Everyone is finding ways to access. Now all the pieces are coming, right? Then the ancient Greeks had ergot because that was the resilient thing that grew in that climate. And then there was other forms of psilocybin, which is the active ingredient in magic mushrooms in Africa. And then the Himalayas, which is Asia, also had ergot, which is like LSD. And so what they did was they packaged it in wine. They called it coquillon. And it was, they had herbs and honey, and that was the stabilizer, and I think some vinegar. And they would put the ergot in it, and they would report, like, that's what, and the argument here, and this is where people might get pissed, is where he says, when Jesus would say, like, the kingdom of God is within you, these types of famous phrases was referring to, don't, like, it's all within you. You can access a higher level in all of these spirits, and then you can understand that intelligence, and that intelligence is in you, and you'll be reminded of that, and you can take that into your everyday life, right? And so then it started to get, they needed to capture that, and the church started to package it in their own way, and the rest is history. I don't do it justice by really making the point, because right now I'm like, it's kind of heresy where I'm just saying, like, Jesus was just like about just tripping off acid and wasn't the enlightened person that we say he is. No, he absolutely was. And he was a healer. And this book just has amazing arguments for a lot of history that was suppressed. And just like everything else I mentioned on today's podcast, these are just ideas. These are interesting things that I'm questioning. These aren't truths that I'm coming out and saying this is the truth, right? I'm just saying I find these things very interesting, and I see them through the lens of my own lived experience. So if I had an experience in Mexico in ayahuasca that sounds exactly like what the immortality key said, way that Jesus explained his own connection to a higher power, well, maybe the fucking middleman of religion is what's getting in my way, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's why I do believe it, right? And I invite people to see for themselves, because I don't have a dog in the fight whether or not you come around to this or not. I mentioned it, as you said, in the men's club, because it's my responsibility as someone who leads the men's club to tell you what's working for me, and hopefully you trust. There's enough trust in that group that you're not going to vilify me because it doesn't resonate with you. And if it doesn't land, that's cool. What's working for you, here's what's working for me. And we go around. That's the whole point of a men's club. It's not for us to just be a house of mirrors and just and be a bunch of yes men, right? And so hopefully the world at large can become more like that. So that was I've been going down a lot of interesting literature to see how much psychedelics have actually played a role in connection and freedom, only to be replaced by division and control.
Right.
Which is why I'm lighting off on this call about COVID, because it's division and control. Even if you argue that it's not control, the fact that you're arguing means it's division.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. We talked about this with the thoughts of Moses and the burning bush when he was on the mountain, right? Didn't we like that he was like on psychedelics, and that's why he was like talking to the burning bush, and he was like the voice of God was coming through the burning bush.
Yeah, all of those stories make a lot of sense through that lens. And
right.
and I'm not saying none of it's true. I'm just saying this is a fascinating book, and it's put together by scholars. This isn't something there's a lot of stuff that corroborates this. And like, he's in Greece and he's going to Italy and he's speaking to priests. And the other fascinating thing I want to add to that is all of this was ran by women. Women back then were like the high priestesses. They were the one they brewed the concoction. The women were the one that did the cooking, that did the brewing. So they were in control of the magic elixir. And so then they were later, exiled as witches, and witches brew and all this stuff, and the witch trials and all this other stuff. But like, before Christianity stepped in, there wasn't a patriarchy. Women were what were revered. And in my own ancient Egyptian culture, that's very much the case. Who reigned was the women. They were the ones in charge of the beer, and the beer and the wine had ergot. It was a psychedelic substance that connected you to the other realm.
Wow.
And
That's
so,
crazy.
and when you take this stuff, you see the sacred geometry that all of these ancient civilizations have embedded in all of their ruins.
The hieroglyphics. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that was the biggest thing is, you know, when you and I met up with you in Playa del Carmen, we went to Puerto Vallarta, right? Puerto Vallarta. Yeah.
Yeah.
To the jungle. And, you know, obviously we experienced and had a ceremony with ayahuasca with the shaman, which, man, it was like the most beautiful experience I could ever imagine, from the music, the setting, the place, like the trees, the plants. Like I was geeking out looking at plants that I recognized that I have in my house behind me. It was like, oh my God, look at that Monstera. This is amazing. Was like after that first cup, you know, 45 minutes in, I'm like, this isn't going to work. Like I can't feel anything. And then it was just like, whoo, geometry and geometric symbols and like all these colors, and fireworks started. And then you and I were like in another, you know, dimension.
Yeah. And like, honestly, it brought me face to face with my own fearlessness, or with my own fear. I realized how much subconscious fear and a need for approval that I had. And so it was lifted in that experience. There's no way I would come on this call right now and talk honestly and openly about how I feel about this pandemic had I not been unlocked with that cup that we had that day. You know, and that's because you saw, I was just like, I have to talk. And there's this, for anyone watching, the shaman has this thing called El Silencio Noble, or El Noble Silencio, right? The noble silence. So like, you really have to honor the silence in the room, because if you start freaking out saying, I got to make noise like I did, then you're disrupting everybody else's healing process. But what I was coming to face with was my proverbial muzzle, that I felt that my spirit was saying, you need to remove your mask, so to speak, right? And
Right.
it wasn't necessarily about the physical mask, but that physical mask did symbolize a blocked throat that had things to say, and that those things are valuable, not to me, but to others as well. And to not share these ideas because of my own fear of acceptance or abandonment is selfish and cowardly. And I need to just put myself out there and share what I feel, even if it can't be 100% corroborated in science. It's what I believe to be true.
Yeah.
It might not be factual, and maybe there isn't a bunch of science that can back it up. It's what I still believe to be true. And I don't want to have to be like with the riots, where I have to have literal undeniable footage every single time I open my mouth to make a point. Right. Like, hopefully there's a little bit of a track record of credibility where we can have these ideas and be like, well, you know, he seems like he's done his research, and maybe he knows what he's talking about.
And what's crazy, what just came to mind is, you know, you experienced that when you came to the US. If you remember like how outspoken you were as a boy, and the stories that you would tell, like you were like literally conducting groups in Egypt, and then you came to the US and you were literally quiet as hell.
Oh my God, I never put that together. There's a subconscious experience that happens every time I leave the country. I open up, and when I come back to America,
I just got crazy goosebumps.
I never realized that.
Do you remember you have that picture where you're in
yes, of course,
in Egypt.
Yeah, in Egypt.
And then when you came to the States, you became like a mute and like weren't outgoing and friendly.
Wow. And that same thing happened. I got really depressed last week when I came back, and I think that I'm sensitive from a young age to the collective energy of America, how it's like it needs everyone to be calmly and politely and perfectly ordered in their place. Otherwise there's chaos. And so everyone needs to play their role to confine themselves to that order to make everything work. I should also mention how much I love America, and I obviously I have so much patriotic pride for this country that I'm contributing everything I have to add value to everyone, like my community and everything. So this is coming from a place of patriotism, but at the same time, I'm sensitive to an energy that I didn't realize it until you said it, that when I leave, I feel charged because I feel unencumbered and free. And like, you can be more of who you are. You come back here, and like, I say that not in a way that, now that you made me realize that, or helped me realize that, I still can say that from a place of hope. I don't want to just go run away. Like, maybe our work here is to find the others, as I posted the other day, and like get people who are like us, where we can give permission to have combating views and contrasting ideas, and like just start generating some unconditional acceptance of everyone. Tolerance not of people who are like us, but tolerance of the right as well. Tolerance of people who are not like us. Tolerance of everyone. Tolerance of people who are not tolerant of us, even.
Right.
Like real tolerance. So that would make me happy to live in America, so I don't have to leave every few months.
Yeah. Yeah, the ayahuasca ceremony I think was incredible for me. It's been calling me, like I said, for 7, 8 years, and finally, you kind of unlocked the key to show me the path to walk, to kind of experience it and to trust where I was going and to not feel in danger. And there was definitely some nerves, but I think I'm anxious to do another ceremony because there's so much more work that needs to be done. And that first ceremony that you and I experienced showed me the path that I need to, it gave me the map, right? Of like where to go to do the work. When I didn't surrender on that first cup, the second cup I did, and I got a taste of it, and I got scared because I was so afraid of the trauma I needed to work through. And that's when I really started to let go and surrender. But I now have the blueprint to do and to continue that work. And I think ayahuasca is the ability to transport me to do that work and show me the path. And then, maybe after a few ceremonies, I have the guidelines of what I need to follow to experience that, which I think is something that we've talked about before, in terms of the medicine is a way to experience this alter universe, but ultimately the use of the medicine is to get you to understand how to access that universe without the medicine as a crutch, and that it's within you to do and to access.
That's a really important distinction for anybody watching, to know that neither the two of us here or the plant itself or any shaman is ever advocating for consistent use of this plant. In fact, what's beautiful about the plant is that it doesn't work like a prescription where the more you take, the more you need. It's the more you take, the more is healed. And the more is healed, then the less is needed. And so, as you said so beautifully, it doesn't do the work for you. It doesn't hold your hand through the territory. It gives you the map. You have to trudge the territory, but now you have a map in hand. And I think that all of us, almost all of us, but I want to have enough faith to say that all of us, everyone in the world, is willing to do the work. We just don't know where to start. And
Right.
we don't know how. And like, if you give me the map, okay, I'll do the rest. Just tell me where to start. Tell me where I need to go. And you get a taste of that through this plant, through this vine. And that's enough. For most people, you never need to come back. And like, I'm like you, I'm never going to just read one book and be like, I know the answers. I need 1,000 books. So I'm never going to do one ceremony and say, that's enough. I want many more ceremonies, but to each their own. I think that you could do one and be completely unlocked. But the point that should be driven home is it should return yourself to your own power. And that power is intrinsic. It doesn't lie in a God in the sky or a vine or in a political affiliation or in a government or in a girlfriend or in your ex who left you or anything like that. And that's liberating freedom, when you know that you have access to something. Because everyone it's so cliche. All you need is self-love. What you need is within you. well, you physically get to rewire your brain around those concepts. So now you're thinking that way.
Right. Yeah. I think the best, I literally think about this daily, is the drawing on the chalkboard that you did in that conscious conversations of connecting to source. And it was the circle and like,
The
was,
projection versus extension.
and like everyone that's outside of the circle, but when you connect the source, like,
It's an
you are an
extension.
extension of you. Yes.
Yeah. So extension, when we create, we're an extension of God. God creates, and then we are an extension of that when we're creating. When we fail to see that, then we inverse extension, and that's projection, which is what we spoke about kind of earlier on the call. It's like we see other people through our like limitedness rather than seeing them through what's coming through us, which is God, right? Mm-hmm. And so we can extend that through, we see their divinity coming from God through us to them. But if we're disconnected to God, then we're just projecting rather than extending.
Right.
And that's something I'm reminded of, which I do. I lose sight of it and then I project. I think everyone does it. All the most enlightened, spiritual, whatever, they all do it to a degree. And like what I always say, what I said that class is, consciousness is not living higher. Consciousness is catching yourself when you're not.
Right.
That's an important distinction.
And check it yourself.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know how much I can say thank you. I think, not only just the friendship, but the experience that we had in Mexico. It changed me, and it was a beautiful experience. And I think it was like perfectly written that, I remember texting you right before. It's like, of course I'm flying to Mexico, and, my first ceremony is with you, from just everything that's happened, from our relationship from the start until now, of how much it's blossomed, and how much I consider you just such a close friend and just somebody that I look up to. I think it was just such an amazing experience to do with you, and to kind of spend those 3 days. And I'm looking forward to our next ceremony for sure.
Dude, I'm ready. I'm trying to go back in February, but we talk about that after the recording's over.
I'm definitely down.
I turned 40 in mid-February, so I'd rather take shots of something that's going to open my mind than shots of something that's going to close it.
I completely agree. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to chat with us. This has been a really enlightening call. You got any closing words? Actually, hold on, wait. On top of your closing words, let us know where we can find you. And obviously, let's give a shout out to Raleigh Raw and all the connections.
Yeah. Instagram is sheriffuad.co. That's SherifFouad.co. That's, to make it easy, that's my Instagram. It's also my Twitter, and it's also my website. And then Sherif@RaleighRaw.com is my email. So hit me up. And then closing remarks. I want to say, as sure as I may have sounded on this call, I consider myself to be a man of no answers and a lot of questions. And so I encourage everyone, especially myself daily, to not ever come from a place of knowing, but a place of seeking to know. I learn that every day. And I was reminded that when I went to Mexico and I saw that their approach to COVID worked. And then I wanted to bring it over to America, and I saw that America has their approach. And like, I don't need to teach in any of that. I just need to know that we all have our own truth, and that truth is valid. And I just want to, I have a lot of questions to ask, and a lot of stuff isn't adding up. I just want to ask questions. The other thing is, if we don't agree with someone, I'd rather choose the relationship over being right. And I encourage all of us to think about that at a time where we're either intentionally or unintentionally being polarized and pitted against each other. Choose the relationship over being right. Choose the human, even if you don't know them on social media and you just want to get off on humiliating them with your resounding knowledge. Choose the relationship, however faint of a relationship, however fleeting of a relationship. Choose the human over the ego of being right, and think for a moment that maybe I'm wrong and maybe I don't know everything about this particular situation. I vow that I will do that. As sure as I always sound in the way I deliver stuff, I'm always second guessing and questioning and looking for ways to disprove what I already know to be true. And I think that would take us a long way if we all do that.
I think that was a good note to end on. Huge shout out to Raleigh Raw, obviously, for bringing not only you and I together, but you know, a lot of individuals in downtown Raleigh together in a time where,
Yeah.
you know, something that we can look at it as a beacon of hope of like continuing for conscious consumption and making sure that we're feeding our bodies with the right ingredients to continue to be healthy and to stay healthy. And so I know that there was a lot of things that we talked about that were controversial, that, you know, a lot of people might not agree with. They might disagree with a lot of the things that you and I have said in this podcast. But I think what I would tell individuals is to seek to find the answers that not just serve you, but that can serve the ultimate finding of what the truth is. And if you find yourself in that TikTok algorithm, step outside of the box and look at the other side, because it might give you a little bit more of an answer than what you're currently just looking for because it's being spoon fed to you.
For sure. Yes. Well
All
said,
right.
man. Thank you. Great to see you, man.
Yo, it was great to see you. I
Let me
appreciate everyone tuning in.